Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. So, welcome to this talk. It's basically a recap of the past 10 years I spent in the Cloud Foundry community. And a few words about myself. My name is Julian Fischer. I'm running a cloud company called Anynines. And as I said, I'd like to share some of my impressions that I gathered on the way. It's been 10 years. Can you believe that? I mean, I've been self-employed my entire life since I was 19, but there's, I'd say, two phases of my career. The one before Cloud Foundry and the part with Cloud Foundry. So it's something that's beyond explanation. It has been a roller coaster for me as an individual, but also for me, or for us as a company. There have been good times, bad times, moments of joy, moments of desperation. The whole spectrum of life happened in those 10 years. And just to give you an example, when the Cloud Foundry events, for me, they often feel like birthday parties because I meet so many friends and people that I truly care about. And so the community to me is about partnership, friends, family, and competition. Basically, could have been a good TV show as well. There were some exciting times, and I traveled the world, been to Asia, been through Europe, been to the US and to Canada. I met friends for life. I know at least two couples that formed in the Cloud Foundry community. And a few years later, they are married and they are two Cloud Foundry kids, I would say. Well, that's exaggeration, but it's definitely true. So very sad that some of these folks can't come here. I think, having that, these kids is maybe part of the reason. But I can tell you, it makes me speechless if I look back and see, what happened during those years and how, Cloud Foundry has not only been a technology, but also, taught me how to be an entrepreneur, lifting the company to a new level. And all that happened, evolving around Cloud Foundry. So yeah, there's actually a lot of life, including, those families that came up from the community. And it shows, that the tech space has so much more to offer than just technology. So I'm ready to share a few of the tales. Cloud Foundry, when I encountered it for the first time, that was back in 2012. I attended a conference in the Silicon Valley. I think it was ChefCon, and there was a talk about Bosch and Cloud Foundry. And, we've been a Ruby on Rails development and hosting shop back in the day. So we did custom development, pretty much what Pivotal did in the days. And we also had a small hosting department that was closer to engine yard. So we building physical and virtual clusters to host those custom-made applications, often to run it at scale. I mean, scale, what meant scale to us, like dozens of servers. So when I encountered Cloud Foundry for the first time, back in the days, Heroku was a big trend, AWS was a big trend. I knew that this is going to be important, especially because in Europe, the adoption of US providers was not that easy because there was a lot of skepticism around, giving away data and so on. So we took the chance and started as a public Cloud Foundry provider in Europe. So the very first version of Cloud Foundry that I laid my hands on, they actually had data services attached to it, which have been later removed. maybe for the better even, but it was clear that, having that unification of application servers, having the ability to, deploy applications, whether it's PHP or Java or Ruby or anything, with a unified user experience that doesn't involve sysops, was definitely a game changer. But at the same time, based on the 12-factor manifest, it was also clear that there must be something similar to host data. Because if you're not one of the hyperscalers, there was no database automation available that really worked at scale. So with the Cloud Foundry technology, having that infrastructure footprint that makes it, that gives it an economy that requires a certain scale to be viable, it was clear that there must be something comparable to Cloud Foundry, but for data services. And we at Anynines, we thought, well, how could it be? Because, obviously, stateful databases, they come with different constraints than stateless applications. And how far could you carry that idea of Cloud Foundry into data service automation? We started to use Bosch to do on-demand provisioning of virtual machines. And the idea of having dedicated virtual machines for each data service instance was, discussed because, dedicated virtual machines, they do have overhead and they are a bit costly. But at the same time, it's the one paradigm with its declarative management and the separation of ephemeral virtual machines from persistent disk. Nowadays, if you think about Kubernetes operators, that appears to be, common wisdom, but nearly 10 years ago, that has not been the case. And it has proven that the on-demand provisioning of dedicated service instances is the most fundamental paradigm that it's the one paradigm, the one thing that gives you the ability to run very small databases, single instances to very large clustered instances with a single automation code base across infrastructures. So our database products that we've created, from that experiment, they now run, across the world, and I don't know, there are 10,000s of virtual machines running and using this automation. So the takeaway from the data service journey was that you cannot build, just a Cloud Foundry-like thing, but you can definitely build a framework that makes it easy to develop new data services. I think we have about 8 or 10 to this day, in a very effective manner. Also, it's been a pleasant journey to see how the Zeitgeist, how the change in the technology ecosystem at a larger scale has impact on Cloud Foundry. I'm not really, prepared to give you the exact history or whatever, but just to give you an idea. The emerge of container technologies as a operating system, lightweight virtual machine with a standardized interface was something that I've been waiting for a long time, because virtual machines, they just create that much overhead, and not every application requires that degree of isolation. Definitely most data services do to this day, but applications, they usually have lighter requirements regarding this. So when I started, in the early days of Cloud Foundry, there were those other technologies like Docker Swarm and Mesos that have been, participating in those, container orchestration, in this container orchestration competition. And it wasn't clear, for example, that Kubernetes will be the prime standard for building, container orchestration platforms at that day. And if you think about the Cloud Foundry application runtime, and you are, let's say, a mid-sized company adapting this technology, you'd be, on a journey, because, this thing would change constantly. Now with Irini and Coryphe or something, that you may say, well, it's a fundamental change. But to me, being in the Cloud Foundry community, this thing changed constantly. They swapped out the core orchestrator like several times, and we had, I also have to mention that over time we've been dragged into the enterprise business, so helping companies to adopt Cloud Foundry a lot. And every time this thing has been swapped, and changed fundamentally, these customers, they had to go through a migration. And I think this is one of the strong sides of Cloud Foundry, and has always been, is that this technology allowed companies and enterprises to work at a scale that no other technology could have provided at the time, especially given the operational efficiencies. So yeah, the pre-DA era, the variants and different versions of the droplet execution agents, and then Diego, that was a major shift in also the ability on how large these environments can get, how many applications they can host. And if you think about the architecture of Diego, it's a very well-designed piece of technology. And it's absolutely not simple to pull off. I mean, imagine you're building that software in the Silicon Valley with, the salaries you'd have to pay there, and you'd have to have like dozens of people taking care of this. So it's a very expensive thing to do, but it has been done in a great way. So the Diego system is a wonderful piece of technology, and I'm a bit sad to see that there's new stuff that will be taking its place at some point. But I mean, that's how it is. We move forward. So in the meanwhile at Anynines, we're talking about few years being in the ecosystem already. We have undergone our self-transformation, because it was clear that the Ruby on Rails as a technology peaked at some point, and also that the competition in web development was getting harder and harder, so that it is just necessary to change the business. We started as a time and material development shop, and it was getting harder to be profitable. We did profits all along our company history, but to be honest, as a CEO, I had employees with more money in the bank than I did, so it wasn't really rewarding. And Cloud Foundry gave us the opportunity to build a product and an ecosystem of product, including data service automation and all that, and changing our target audience from startups to enterprise companies. And suddenly we've been able to think about, what do we do? What are we going to invest next year? I mean, as a Ruby on Rails development shop, we were thinking like, how do we pay our salaries next month? And so that was definitely, maybe also partly because the startup ecosystem in Europe is not funded in a similar way than it is in the US, and I have to mention that too. So I think, we've created that series of products. It's not about shameless self-promotion here. It's basically about telling the story that these data service automation products are built using BOSH as the declarative virtual machine automation technology, and that this enabled us to become a very different company. So we doubled in size. I mean, we've been profitable in the books, but I mean, it's not worth it, mentioning it. It was just the pain to fund ratio, I would say, was dealing with small companies. Looking at startup founders, they will borrow money from their grandparents to build the next Facebook and stuff like this. It was just horrible at times. So, and changing to companies that have a certain momentum when you start doing things was a transformational experience to me too. So the enterprise. I've never been working for an enterprise in my entire life. I studied computer science after my first company when I was 19 was barely able to fund me, and after that I founded Anynines, or was called Avatech at the day. So I walked into those enterprise companies with knowledge about how to do Cloud Foundry, and they were really, really interested to get to that knowledge. But I had no idea how these companies work internally, and what their struggles are, and what to do with them. So, I mean, this has been a game changer for me as an entrepreneur as well. So all thanks to Cloud Foundry. Also, it taught us what scale actually means. For example, one of our larger customer at that time, I was asking, how many employees do you have? Like 10,000 or 20,000? And this guy told me, he said like, yeah, it's more like 400,000. I'm like, this is a small country. I mean, how I cannot imagine that. So, these companies, they can make, a Cloud Foundry work internal to their organization because they're just so big. And they put like thousands, if not 10,000 of applications in some of these environments. So I really, with the background, we did chef automation for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. So we had a cookbook code base to run all the major application frameworks, the development frameworks, the major databases. We were sitting on that code base. And then Cloud Foundry happened with the declarative management in Bosch. And we just threw all the chef code away and redid it in Bosch. And I mean, we had this shell shock moments and log4shell, whatever these exploits have been, where we had to basically change the operating systems of 20 or 30,000 virtual machines for our customers in the shortest amount possible. And you do that by declaring a few lines of code and just let this thing happen for a few days. I mean, it's beyond description. The degree of predictability that is enabled by the ephemeral VM and persistent disk paradigm in conjunction with declarative management is something that is so powerful that's absolutely mind-blowing. So yeah, all that, the enterprise and learning how to operate software at scale, and actually was like we did, build those automation products, and we then found out at which scales they'll work. We didn't know. Right, these environments were growing that fast that there was new uncharted territory for us, like every week, every month, and we've been sitting there like, hell, it works. We don't know why, but it's reliable and it works. So yeah, I mean, it transformed our business. We've been able to generate more recurring revenue, becoming more predictable, which also means that we can invest into our own product development. One takeaway, and I do have to admit there are some regrets, is I learned that balancing partnerships with other vendors is hard. Whether they are smaller than you, whether they are equal size, or whether they are much bigger. Maybe I was a bit naive at first, but I didn't see how hard it is to establish true partnerships. So if you are a partner manager, I really have the deepest respect, because it's sometimes an impossible situation to pull off partnerships and keep them balanced. So for example, we've been in partnerships, we've built this machinery to deliver and operate Cloud Foundry environments, and we had a situation where if there were no contracts coming, I couldn't pay the salaries, right? So we had to do something about it. And we've been tempted by clients to offer competing products with partners and all that, and they did have the same situation. So going back, I would do certain things differently, but my takeaway is partnerships need to be balanced at the level of the interest, so fundamentally right that whenever there's like a strong overlap in interests, like where there's, the soil competition can grow within a partnership, it is very likely to kill it. And then Kubernetes happened. I mean, that didn't happen from one day to the other, but definitely. If I would like to sum up, or if I need to sum up what this felt like for a company, after we've transformed to become Cloud Foundry only, I think of this Depeche Mode song where Kubernetes, like violence, break the silence and came crashing into my little world. So we've been, uncertain about what Kubernetes means for the ecosystem. But I'd have to say, after looking at it for a while, I mean, it is a true chance to cut down the cost of maintaining Cloud Foundry by a lot, because I mean it's such a great thing to build platforms, and we just have to accept that. And also, it took a few years to understand the magnitude of Kubernetes' impact on the technology ecosystem, which is way beyond being a container scheduler. In particular, it became the leading paradigm to build, platform technology at a broader scale. If you think, for example, at Crossplane, you're not reconciling resources within a Kubernetes cluster, but also, beyond Kubernetes clusters. And it gives you a way of building technologies in a declarative way with a standardized API. And that's, it's forging a standard that has never been there before. So it would be foolish to just ignore it. You can't. And it took several refactoring attempts, in Cloud Foundry to realize how large the impact is. So if you think back at kubectf and Cloud Foundry for Kubernetes, for example, that's a community learning that you'd have to go much more. You'd have to go all into Kubernetes to stay relevant, because it's the environment is constantly changing, and the tech ecosystem is as well. So I think we're getting there. So if you ask me about Coryphe, I would say yes. Now we are there. The application runtime that's been built, with Coryphe, it sounds like, yeah, this is how it should be done. Now, if I look at our customer base, where there are large organizations with large platforms, I would say the main challenge now is to maintain that operational efficiency at scale. Because, those companies running Cloud Foundries these days, they bought into Cloud Foundry because of it. Because of, the way you can, for example, manage policies using build packs, where there's, a better control, but also the operational efficiencies enabled by Bosch for both data services and applications. So Cloud Foundry is not just the application runtime, but there's also Bosch as a major ingredient. So if you think about Kubernetes, you'll get a Kubernetes everywhere. It's not a problem to get a Kubernetes cluster. But we are talking about clients who run workloads across the globe. They're using Amazon in the US, they're using whatever, Azure in Europe, and they're using Ali Cloud in China. And they want to deploy their workloads as seamlessly as possible. So how do you operate these Kubernetes clusters on those different infrastructures, including on-premise scenarios, in a declarative way that gives you an operational efficiency comparable to running Bosch? And maybe I'm not educated well enough in Kubernetes, but I don't see how this works today. There are technologies that are very promising, but there's no drop-in replacement that will work and enable that to do at scale. So I think it's important that we preserve that operational efficiency. I think it is possible. I think, for example, Crossplane goes into the right direction. So you need to be able to describe Kubernetes clusters, including Coryphe, being able to become big enough to be worth migrating those large Cloud Foundry environments off. And we're talking about the scale of 10,000s of applications per environment, just to be clear. And at the same time, if you're thinking about why did Cloud Foundry not, for example, outperform Kubernetes, I think one of the reasons is it was hard to download Cloud Foundry after a day of work in the office just to play around with it. We had this micro Bosch at the early days, but it was never something that was lightweight and easy to play with. So with Coryphe, that can change. You can make that experience more, just more rewarding at smaller scales, and also the economy of scale will change, and will have to change, because in the context of tens or hundreds of apps, that's when Cloud Foundry has been, just not economically viable in the past, and I think it can be in the future. So that's about my predictions of the future. We don't know the future for certain, so let's see how it plays out. So the summary and conclusion of the talk to me is, Cloud Foundry evolves along the Zeitgeist, and it does that very well. Kubernetes is a great chance to lower the investments necessary to get Cloud Foundry up and running, having a Diego subsystem and being able, and maintaining it. I think it's very costly. The one thing that I, care about most is Bosch as a technology. I would like to see that the spirit of Bosch will be continued. I don't think as a technology you just take Bosch and make it Kubernetes. That's not how it works. But that operational efficiency, that's something I'm after. And we do a lot of research. It's actually the majority of the research we do at Anynines is to look for something that will allow to migrate those large environments into the Kubernetes world at some day. So, is it worth joining the Cloud Foundry community at this day? I would say absolutely. It is one of the most extraordinary places to be. The intimacy of having a smaller community is something that gives it a particular charm. When I go at a KubeCon and I love Kubernetes, I sometimes feel a bit lost. I never had this feeling in the Cloud Foundry community where you can connect to people, great minds, and I will stay in this community as long I can. So if you haven't joined it yet, it's a good time and point to do it. And also, quoting myself here, it's a game changer and life changer. It forged my professional career like nothing ever did, and I'm very grateful to that. And I know many friends who have made the same experience. So last but not least, I would like to say thank you to all of you for listening to my talk, providing me your time, but also to companies such as VMware and Pivotal, IBM and SAP. I'm skipping our customers because I'm not sure whether I could, name them, but a big thank you to you, because those last 10 years, I couldn't imagine doing something different. So thank you very much for all of that, and just help me to, just stay on the journey with us in Cloud Foundry. There's a bright future ahead, and I'm very looking forward to it. So thank you very much, and have a nice one. I'll be around.